composer, Reena Esmail.
Hey.
And Reena, I know you've been writing for professional orchestras and choirs and chamber music for many years, but you kind of, burst onto the band scene here recently and excited to talk to you about some of your compositions for Winds and what your experience, with that has been like. But kind of before we get into that, I think we need to know like a little bit more about like maybe your musical backstory, your personal backstory, and we could maybe start with just kind of like tell us like, what things in your life kind of led you to pursuing composition, as a career, kind of what experiences, what influences you had might be a good way to start.
Yeah, it's interesting because I never thought, I wasn't one of those kids who grew up thinking, oh, I'm going to be a composer. But I think if you had looked back in my life, you would see like I was really someone who was always composing. And I would always, I studied piano, I studied guitar when I was a kid, I studied a little bit of violin. And I would always kind of start to learn the piece and then I would get kind of bored with what was there and then try to make up something and change maybe some rhythms, change some melodies, write a counter line. And I didn't grow up in a musical family, so my parents didn't think anything of it. They thought, I don't know, we're giving her music lessons, maybe this is what kids do. And eventually, it was kind of at the point where, this was before the internet, before you could find things easily. If I couldn't find the sheet music for something at my local sheet music store, I would just write it from listening to it. I would listen to a recording and then write it down. And I didn't have perfect pitch, but I just got really good relative pitch. And there was a point where my parents were like, is this normal? And my music teachers were like, no, this is not normal. Most people don't do this. So lucky for me, I wanted to be a concert pianist. It's interesting. The Chopin preludes are up here on my piano right now. And those were things I really loved as a kid. And I had kind of stage fright. And at the same time, I was someone who felt like I was very creative. I could understand the inner workings of music. And I didn't know what that meant when I was that age because, that was a time before we saw composers and they were just among us all the time. The composers were people whose names were on the side of the page and you were like, I wonder who that is. You weren't really thinking that that was even a person. And so it wasn't until I went to an arts high school and I really went there so that I would have the time to practice piano so I could get into conservatory, but my theory teachers were like, hey, you might be a composer. Like, why don't you try studying composition? One thing led to another, and I basically after a few years of composing, I got one of the very few spots in the composition program at Juilliard. And that was when I thought, like, okay, maybe I'm good at this. Like, maybe I can do this. So that was the beginning of my journey.
And then I know, kind of just, researching about you, even though we've known each other, but I just kind of doing the
Yeah.
prep work for this. You got the Fulbright, you went overseas, you started to kind of research all these different kind of Hindustani elements of music. Like, what was that experience like for you, and kind of how did it change your process, kind of, to this day as a composer?
Yeah, it was interesting because I have 4 degrees in Western classical composition, and I loved that. And I loved, learning the music of these great musicians, studying Bach and Beethoven and all of that. And then at the same time, I was just really aware, like, I'm from a different culture and my family's culture is not the same as the culture of the music that I'm studying. And that to me, it didn't feel like, oh, why is it that way? But I just thought, am I going to spend my whole life just completely divided where there's not really a interstitial space between those two things? And so on the side, when I was living in New York and I was, going to school there and stuff, I was also meeting amazing Indian classical musicians because I really wanted to seek out people who shared my culture. And I just realized, there's plenty of classical musicians who are Indian. They're just not Western classical musicians, or at least they weren't in my generation. That is really changing now, and part of what I'm sure we'll discuss later. So yeah, when I first really discovered Hindustani classical music, it was through musicians who I just loved as people. And then I was like, well, hey, what do you do? Teach me about the music that you work in, that musical style. And I fell in love with the music because I fell in love with the people who did it. And still today, I think so much of my practice is based on people who I love, who are Hindustani musicians, who I just let them guide me organically into, whatever's next, and we build things together.
Yeah, it's really nice to kind of hear about your kind of experience with that and kind of bridging the two different kind of, languages, so to speak. I guess
Yeah.
as someone who's like researched that, you have so much more experience kind of in that voice. You have almost, access, like I said, to a different language. For kind of the audience, what would you say are some of like the, unique features of Hindustani music that you have access to in your writing that work with Western music? And then what would you say are maybe some of the complementary features of Hindustani music that really kind of align nicely in this bridging process that you've kind of become known for?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are some things that are very similar. You know, the way that we learn solfege, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, they have a very similar sa, re, ga, ma, pa, da, ni, sa, and it works in the same way. So there are usually tonic centers, there are rhythmic cycles that we would kind of consider either meters or hypermeters. There are things like that that do align. And so there are ways to kind of bridge that gap. But then I think Hindustani music is primarily, number one, it's primarily a solo art. So even if there are multiple people on the stage, there's going to be one leader. And that's because Hindustani music is largely an improvised tradition. And so you would need someone to be the kind of guiding force so that everyone knows how to follow them and where to come in line. Whereas in Western music, obviously that's not the case. And it's because we have this very complex notation system that really dictates every note and rhythm that we perform, that allows us to do these really complicated things where we don't necessarily know who the leader is, and people take different times being in the spotlight. And so that's one of the really big differences. And then another thing is that Hindustani music, again, because it's improvised, the level of melody in Hindustani music is much more complex than it is in Western classical music. So think about all the complexity that you'd have in an orchestration, but it's just kind of reduced down into a single melody. And it's so subtle, and it's something that really can't be notated, even though goodness knows I've spent my whole life trying to at least notate a little bit of it for Western musicians to experience. It's oftentimes, I think sometimes my music looks a little bit crazy because I'm trying to notate this improvised style. But there's that element there where you can do these really complex, beautiful melodies in Hindustani music because you learn them by ear. And certainly the same with rhythm. You know, we have these meters, and we think of them as like 1, 2, 3, 4, or like 1 and a 2 and a. That's how we think of them. Meter in Hindustani music is so much more complex. It's so much more. Each beat has just so much more information to it, and a kind of a sound, an openness, a closedness, a kind of a it's almost more like you're speaking syllables than that you're just counting meter. So just because of the way that the two systems evolved, some things are quite different, and then some things are bridgeable at least.
It sounds highly complex, and I think it's a good point we said about your music kind of sometimes maybe looks complex, but it just sounds very unique and super interesting. I guess, you've been out here for like many years writing professionally. You're kind of doing your thing. You're having success. And we've somehow, we drew you into the band world somehow. And I'm very grateful for that. So I want to kind of start with the first piece for band and, essentially, what it is that sparked, right, your interest to write for band. And what were your expectations kind of writing for this medium? And what were some of the considerations that you had to take into account writing your first piece for band relative to maybe a professional orchestra, a chamber ensemble, or a choir?
That's such a great question. And, again, I think part of the reason why I never saw myself writing for band throughout my education is because I had never gone to a school that had a band, for one. Like, I went to usually pretty small schools, and I grew up in Los Angeles, where I still live, and then I went to school in New York. And so a lot of the band culture is not in those places necessarily as robust as it is in other places. So I never had a school band. And then when I went to conservatory, it was largely about teaching people how to write for these professional ensembles. And actually, a lot of conservatory is just about teaching you to write for like chamber music and orchestra. Even choir is something that you often don't learn at a conservatory. And so it was interesting. So I went through this whole life, and a lot of what I started to see is that while professional musicians, oh my goodness, I love writing for them. They can do anything. They're often so creative and incredible. I was noticing that, of course, every professional musician starts as someone who is a young person who is really, really in love with music. And sometimes the professional world kind of takes it out of you. And I found that I was working with a lot of people who were incredibly talented, but maybe we're just feeling a little bit burned out and feeling like, oh my gosh, we're in this orchestra, we're in this ensemble, we're trying our best to just churn out this music as fast and as well as we can. But like, what are we feeling inside? Are we really feeling fed and fulfilled? And because of that, there's one step even before the band world, I started working in the educational world, because people are not professional musicians. I mean, obviously the directors are, but The students are there purely for the love and the joy of learning how to play those instruments well. And I found that there was such a joy to that. And I really wanted to be able to bring that energy into the professional music world. So then, I started working with professionals, with student string ensembles, with student choirs, and I had this whole other, career that blossomed about 10 years ago in the choral world, and I loved that. And so at one point, I was at a school in Naperville, Illinois, and I was working with their string program, and it was super wonderful. I was having the best time, and the band director, Mark Duker, comes up to me and says, "Hey, like what you're doing here, I want you to do it for band." And it was interesting because Naperville is an area with a large South Asian population, and so of course I was working with the string group, but a lot of the Indian kids were in band as well. And he was like, "I want this for my students." And of course, for me, like to give students an experience is something that will always be really close to my heart. So I said, "Look, I mean, I don't know how to write for band. I've never written for band before. I've only written for these instruments in a professional situation, and even then, not some of them. But I'm willing to try." And I do find that as a composer, I love the experience of just trying to get into something I don't know and using the tools that I have of something that I do know to try to get into something I don't know. And so I said, "Look, if you're here with me and you can give me some feedback and you can help me kind of tailor this thing, I'm excited to build this with you." And so that's where it started.
Yeah, and huge thanks to Mark for connecting us, obviously.
Yeah.
So with this first piece, right, the title is three different types of translations of spark. So I'm wondering if you could just kind of talk us through like the nuts and bolts of the three movements, kind of the Hindustani elements present within, and how, a group might, approach programming this piece as kind of their first, voyage into your writing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, that was my first voyage into band writing as well. So it's it's kind of the perfect thing. I think to me, the first thing is that this piece has a tabla in it. So for those of you who don't know, a tabla is an Indian hand drum, and it's comprised of these two drums. Now, for some percussion instruments, and from different cultures, sometimes you can actually just train a person in your ensemble to play that instrument. But tabla is one of those where you really have to have a lot of training in order to play it. However, I will say that a lot of times, what I've found is that there are a number of South Asian students in band these days. So first and foremost, question your students and see, because you never know who is studying tabla on the side and might actually be someone who could play this piece. If you do have tabla training, it's quite basic in terms of what you would need to do. So you don't need to be a full-time professional to do that. However, if you want to play the piece and you just have absolutely no access to a tabla, you're in an area where there's like no tabla player around and you don't know how to find that person. I would say there is a part that is for a dumbek, and you might be able to use that and still get a lot of the benefit of the piece. Because, of course, the band also plays Hindustani music in this piece. Each movement is in a raga. So the first movement is in Raag Pimpalas, and that is like, it feels a little bit like it's Dorian, but you navigate it a little bit differently. And one of the features of the movement, number one, it has a kind of a tune to it that would be a very kind of typical Hindustani melody. The other thing it has is a little bit of vocal percussion. So everyone gets a chance to kind of try to say the word chamaka, 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 chamaka. And that's something that's very typical of Indian vocal music. So there's a bit of that. And then there's one solo in that movement. So if you have a student either who does have Hindustani training, whatever instrument they play, or if they want to try it out, there's certainly an audio guide to go along with it to help that student maybe take a little bit of a step to improvising in the Hindustani style. So that's the first movement. The second movement is in a rag called Hamsadvani. Again, I should go back and just say, when I'm saying the word rag, R-A-A-G, or could be R-A-G-A, raga, that might be one you've heard a little bit more commonly. What that means is it's essentially what we would consider a scale, except if the scale also had a lot of other information in it, like, the way that you would navigate up and down in a specific way, maybe also some aesthetic information about the time of day you would perform it, the time of season you would perform it in. There's a lot more information in rags than there are in scales, but they kind of map onto a similar framework. So in any case, the second movement is in a different raga, and that's also a chance to kind of have a more lyrical quality and kind of align the ensemble so that they're kind of feeding off each other's waves of melody. And then the third movement actually takes this theme. It's in a rag called jog, but it's a little bit off from there because I wanted to actually have a couple more notes to work with because we have harmony in the band world, obviously, that we don't have in Hindustani music. And so that piece is actually a melody that reduces and reduces and reduces. So it starts in 7, moves down to 6, 5, 4, and it takes one beat out each time. And so it's really fun to play. And I found that even young ensembles really enjoy playing it, and it's a way to see how a melody can kind of keep on reducing in on itself, and the tension builds. It's really fun. So yeah.
Yeah, that was quite an education. And also now we have your authoritative pronunciations, which I think is going to be a great resource as well. I know you get to hear the piece at Midwest, and in some of your other content, I know you talked about that some people might consider like it a burden to have to be the first compositional voice that presents this type of music, but you actually consider it like a great opportunity to kind of be that first interaction. So like, what was your experience like hearing the piece at Midwest, big audience, a big exposure for the piece, and also kind of just this type of music in general?
I mean, for me, first of all, like I had never before, even a couple of years ago, I didn't even know what Midwest Clinic was because I wasn't in this world. And so then I even going there and being there and seeing how many people were there, how many people who just love the band world and band music were at this place. It was so inspiring, just even being in the audience for one. And then hearing my piece being done, and it was done so beautifully by John Hersey High School, and it was awesome to watch people take it in, and people came up to me afterwards. And what was really interesting is that everyone approaches you with the context that they have. So there were people there who were like from a different Eastern tradition. Maybe I think there are a few people who were like Iranian there, and then a few people who were, just from a different, even East Asian. And everyone was trying to kind of relate the music to something that they knew. And then for people who were, had never seen a tabla before, they were like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this drum. This is so amazing. Even some of the students in the ensemble were like, what is this sound of this percussion instrument we've never heard before? So it's a combination of people trying to find a point of commonality and to try to like parse something that feels so different to them. And I love both those things because, like you said, it's a lot when someone has never heard Indian classical music before. And I mean, honestly, I've worked in situations, and this may actually be situations for some of the people listening to this, where you have a band in an area where there are not a lot of Indian people. So some of your students, or even you, may have never met an Indian person in person before. And I've certainly worked in areas where that is the case, right? And for me, that's amazing because I have a chance to shape the narrative about what our culture is, what our music is, the way that we meet people as people. I think I feel very lucky to come from a culture that is so warm, that's so artistic, that's so colorful, and all I really want to do is share that with people. So yeah, to me, it's the greatest joy to have someone discover Indian music for the first time and feel that they just are allured to it and they want to move a little further in that direction.
Yeah, it's very cool that you feel that way and kind of are so open about being that access point.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to this recent piece, I know we've been communicating about it. This your new kind of lyrical piece, Rozana. Could you talk a little bit about, besides me asking you, what led you to kind of write something maybe a little bit more lyric on the lyrical side, and what your experience was kind of writing in a different style than this first piece for band, and kind of how you think it turned out?
Yeah, I know. We just got the recording back. It sounds so beautiful. I just have to say, I mean, wow, the level of some of these bands I've heard. I know the recording that will be on the site is by professionals, but I've over the years heard now a number of bands play my music, and I'm always surprised that people who are so young are able to like count in different time signatures, are able to just tune chords in a certain way. The level always surprises me and really makes me so happy, because all you want as a composer is for people to invest really deeply in your music and perform it as well as they possibly can. So that's been a joy. But yeah, this piece it's interesting because it almost comes full circle, because when I wrote that first piece, when I wrote Chamak for band, the piece that Mark Duker heard that made him commission me was the first movement of that is what became Rozana. So it was just interesting because he was hearing this piece and thinking, oh my gosh, I need her to write something for band. And now a bit of that piece is actually for band. So this is a piece where I was trying to find something for a bit of a younger audience. And again, when I get into something, I really like to try every possible element of it. And I know a big part of the band culture that obviously you wouldn't find in the professional world. And so because of that, you often don't find it in orchestra and chamber music in the same way, is this kind of grading process where people can enter at different levels. And there's people take very seriously the rep for the youngest ensembles as well as going up. And to me, it's like, okay, I love students of that age. I love working with students of that age. So my very first inspiration was just the idea that writing a piece that students of that age can engage with, which is like a grade 2 band type of age, it allows me to then connect to them. And that's really awesome. Because I think a larger point is that as we go forward in time, what I'm starting to see is that there actually are more South Asians in bands than there were even in my time. But even when I was growing up, if I had any relative or any Indian friend who was doing something, usually musically they were in a band. And so I feel like band has always been that place for South Asians. So I'm like, if I do want to actually connect into people who share my culture of the next generation, that's the place to do it. And especially with young students, before they get too busy, before they start to have academics take over, all of those issues that are, our particular South Asian issues. I want to have that access point to them. And so, that's the first thing that inspired me. And then just the thought of like, I want each of those students to have a really lovely experience playing, engaging with Hindustani music for the first time. And so this raga, it's actually the same raga as the one that's the middle movement of Chamak. It's this raga called Hamsadvani. And it's just supposed to be a really simple melody. And the word Rozana means like daily. It's like a quotidian, it's like a daily thing, a ritual. And so the idea for that first piece came out of that line from the Catholic Our Father, give us this day our daily bread, right? It's like, what is your daily bread? What is the thing that keeps you sustained throughout your day? And so Rozana has that. That's where the title comes from. And so the idea is just as they're playing it, I hope the piece gives them that feeling of sustenance, and I hope that it like lets them think for a moment about what is it that they care about in their life, and to kind of cultivate that and let it grow.
Yeah, that's a wonderful kind of description. And I think different from the shamak with this is there's no tabla, there's no overt kind of addition of extra instruments, but you still get all of that kind of Indian classical melodic content kind of baked into the piece. And it just turns out it's kind of a wonderful kind of lyricism. But it's interesting that it's not right there kind of front and center like the first piece was with that instrumentation.
Exactly, because and that's the thing. I'm so glad you brought that up because I love to kind of there's so many ways to have levels, right? And just the way that we grade band pieces so that it gives people an indication of based on the methodology what is the music they can handle. I'm also thinking about logistical levels, right? So it's like if you're a late elementary school, middle school teacher, are you really gonna, unless you're in a big city or something, are you really gonna have the access, the budget, all of that to go out and hire a tabla player? Is there likely to be a tabla player in your city? If not, I don't want you to feel like you're somehow on the back foot or somehow like you're not doing the right thing, right? I want there to be an access point for you to feel like there's a successful way for you to perform this piece. So I think about all those things logistically as well. When I write all the way from elementary school music all the way up to professional music, I think when you're trying to combine cultures, you're really trying to minimize those logistical concerns at every level so that people can focus on the music.
Yeah, absolutely. And even as a lyrical piece too, I think it even makes it even more accessible.
Right.
Okay, so moving on kind of through your band catalog, I want to kind of touch them all. Okay, so over to the Tutarana. The title itself even kind of is from this blended place. When you're thinking, obviously you have some interest in expanding your band catalog, you look at your current catalog, what is it about this, besides its extreme popularity on the choral side, what is it about that piece that you thought would translate well to, the wind ensemble world, and how do you think that it was realized after you went about that process?
Yeah, this idea for Tutarana, I'm not sure when it came to me, but what is fascinating is like the whole journey of Tutarana is it almost feels like I backed my way into it entirely because the when I in 2015 a choir asked me, and it was actually a treble choir, and they were saying, a lot of treble choir music is because usually it's women, now a lot of non-binary people as well will sing in treble choirs, but it usually has this connotation of like, oh, let's sing about love and flowers and all of that. And it's like, okay, all of that is fine, but maybe, women have more things that they can sing about. And so the conductor, Lindsay Pope Gregory, she said to me, I just want something that feels like it has that Indian flavor to it because India was very important to her as well. And she was like, I want that, but I want kind of the opposite of whatever this, lyrical piece about love and flowers is. And I was like, okay, I will do exactly that. And so what I did was this crazy, wild, rhythmic piece. And of course, I didn't think it was ever going to get performed again after just that one thing. I was like, okay, we've done our thing. Mount Holyoke Glee Club has performed it. We're done here. And then, because again, if you look at the Tutarana choir score, it looks insane. Like it looks like no one should ever be able to perform it. And so I was like, no one's performing this thing again. This is never happening. But then a few other choirs picked it up, a few others choirs picked it up, and Allstate picked it up. And before I know it, I'm like traveling the country just to hear Tutarana being done. And I mean, I'm going on YouTube and I'm finding like competitions of people trying to sing it faster than other people. And, this is even crazy. I went to, ACDA, the American Choral Directors Association, the conference, which is very much like the Midwest Clinic of choir. And apparently they had done a March Madness bracket, and Tutarana and this piece by Jennifer Lucy Cook, Time, were the two final pieces in this March Madness choir bracket. And I was like, this is just blowing my mind. So to me, I was like, okay, I'm just going to follow this energy and this love for this piece wherever it goes, kind of. And I think, honestly, that has been a staple of my career of like, I just see where the energy and the love is. And I'm like, okay, let me just give that love back, right? So the next arrangement of Tutarana came and it was for brass quintet. And a friend of mine asked me like, oh, would you write this small piece for brass quintet? And I was like, oh, I don't have time to write an original piece, but would you want me to arrange Tutarana? And they were like, yeah, sure. Oh my God, that blew up in the brass world. And so then, then people are like, oh, well, you should do stuff for choir and brass because of Tutarana. And then I was like, maybe I'm in the band world now. I'm listening to the way that bands sound, and I kind of feel like they would kill it with Tutarana. So that was a moment where I was like, let me just arrange it and see what happens. And I know you and I had talked about this, and I was like, here you go, let's put this out in the world. Andrew Yazbiak did this beautiful recording of it. And I remember the first time I heard Andrew's recording, I was like, oh, this is something. Like, this is really interesting. And since then, it's kind of taken off.
Yeah, it's been our most streamed piece of the year. And I think it's like that old adage, just like when it's good, it's good. And like the medium is like secondary. Like you're onto
Right.
something, obviously, with the Tutarana kind of
Yeah.
melodic concepts that it just has transcended, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I want to also then kind of move to this new transcription, this remember transcription, just to kind of touch on all your new
Sure.
music here. I know we're kind of finalizing that now. Um,
Yeah.
it's gotten very popular in the orchestra world, and now
Yes.
it's coming for band. I know the orchestra world can be kind of fickle in its programming. Not to call out the
Mhm.
orchestra world. What is it about Remember that you think has allowed it to like kind of latch on in the orchestra world? Because I feel like if you can break through the orchestra world, you can break through pretty much anywhere. So what is
Yeah.
it about this piece that has like kind of had it catch on a little bit in the orchestra world?
It's interesting because I think there are so many reasons why a piece kind of breaks through in the orchestra world. Because I certainly have had, number one, my whole training is working in the orchestra world. So to me, that's what I was trained to do, and that's what I've been kind of doing my entire life. So of course, I'm already a composer who's known in that world. But then also, when you write very short pieces, sometimes it just allows people to say yes easily. And so this is essentially a 5 minute orchestra piece that's supposed to kind of function as an overture, but on either side it has this solo and duo for solo oboe. So there's some element of it feeling very personal because I wrote this piece actually in the pandemic. Like it was commissioned by Seattle Symphony, and the commission obviously came about before the pandemic, and they said this is going to be the piece that actually opens the season. So people will come back into the hall after a few months away, and they'll be hearing this piece. And what ended up happening is the piece ended up opening the first concert after COVID of Seattle Symphony. And you can imagine like what that felt like to people to actually not have heard live music for 18 months and then suddenly be in this hall hearing Remember as the very first sounds they're hearing. And so what I did, and what the piece is kind of about, is that it takes this recording of an oboist, and you can certainly do it live as well. There's suggestions in the score of all the different ways you can do it. But the initial one had a recording of the principal oboist, Mary Lynch of Seattle Symphony, and it was her just playing like as if she was on a Zoom in her living room. And then the piece starts, the orchestra comes on, the 5-minute overture happens, and then at the very end, you get live Mary, the physical person playing on the stage with her own recording. So to me, that was kind of the coolness of the piece when it premiered. But then after that, I do think that I really wanted in that short amount of time and in this overture type of form to give every instrument a chance to really sing melodically in the way that they best could. And so sometimes those are just very fast runs in the percussion that kind of show their virtuosity. Sometimes it's a really beautiful low brass melody that will highlight the tubas and trombones. So it has that melodic element that allows each kind of instrument to have a melody that they really love to that really highlights their instrument, I guess. And so because of that, I think it's satisfying for the players to play. I mean, I hope it's satisfying for the players to play. And it's also something that's just very colorful and changes so quickly, and the cuts are so fast between material that it has this kind of exciting element to it. So I think that's my guess, so it's been professional orchestras, it's been a lot of festival orchestras have done it, even students, like conservatory students have done it. So it's not easy. Like, it's definitely a tough piece because there's a lot of very quick connections. But again, I'm very surprised because people who I didn't think that university ensembles could handle it, but they absolutely can. So it's really cool.
Yeah, and all the colors you're describing, I think it translates nicely to winds. You know, that whole color palette, you can kind of feature all the different timbres, and I think that's probably, not to, speak for you, but probably a reason it worked out for winds, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing, is I feel like I'm still learning the orchestrational elements for winds, because it's like I know how to orchestrate for orchestra. I've written so much music for orchestra. And then I know how to write original music for winds, and I'm kind of figuring that out. But to actually be able to do a reorchestration exercise, and I would say the first pass at this orchestration was done by Logan Sori, who is based out of Boulder, Colorado. He's at CU Boulder. And so, he was so kind. He did this for a doctoral thesis project, and now I'm taking it and kind of revamping it. So it's both my and Logan's work. And frankly, it's also fascinating to see what someone else does when they're orchestrating your work, because sometimes someone who has worked in the band medium his whole life would know a little better than I would what some of the interesting colors and sounds and things are. Whereas, I may not have those color palette options yet, but it's really fun to learn how someone else sees your music.
I think you're learning very quickly. Okay, so you've had this opportunity to work with professional orchestral players, vocalists, choirs, bands. I guess to kind of focus on the positive for sure, what do you think is something that nice, positive about the choral people and the orchestra people, that band people, like what could we learn from the orchestra people? Like what did the orchestra people do well as a society that we could really learn from? What did the choral people do well as a society? What did the chamber players do well that us band folk could really kind of zero in on and try to kind of improve ourselves?
Ooh, I love that. And I love the positive framing of that question, because I think I'm always thinking about like where are the lacks that we can make up for. But I think, well, so with orchestra players, I mean, they train their whole life to be able to get those jobs, and I think there's something that happens when you start when you're, maybe 3 years old when you're a string player, maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old when you're a wind player, to actually be able to train for your entire life and to bring that into your professional career. So a lot of times the people I'm working with are people who have been at this career for what, anywhere from 25 to like 50 years. And that to me is so amazing, that longevity and how they continue to keep on growing even into their adult life, being able to play their instruments. So I think that's really awesome. And the fact that they're so flexible with their repertoire, it's like they could be playing a Beethoven symphony and then they go off the stage, they come back on and they're playing like Thomas Addis, and the fact that they're able to pivot so quickly is really incredible. So I would say that probably from the professional orchestra world, certainly. From the choir world, I think the thing about choir is it's narrative. It has these kind of narrative forms to it, and because of the text. And so you'll find a lot of times that people have this way of expressing things that is so personal and so deep because that narrative kind of means something to them. I also noticed that with band and choir, it's often similar because it happens in schools very intensely, and then on an amateur level, often when people are older, unless they're in very top level ensembles, right? And so the thing that's it's interesting that that when I'm looking at, say, high school choir and high school band, the choirs are very, and it's just a personality thing. The singers are so live. They're just like high energy, like ready to go all the time. You have to like reduce their screaming in order to get them to just focus on singing. And for me, the thing is, I am not that personality type, but I've actually had to really learn to meet their energy in order to be able to draw them in. But it's great. It's like when I was must have been in my early 20s, I was teaching at Manhattan School of Music pre-college, and I used to have this 8 a.m. class of a theory class of all singers. Oh my goodness. Like I was awake the second they walked into the room. But I love it. I love their energy. So I think that's one thing. With chamber music, the thing that I love, and chamber music is such an amazing place to be. And I would say, for those of you who are in a band and you've only ever played in a big ensemble, try to play some chamber music. Even if it's easy, even if it's something where you're just, playing a round or a canon with someone, what is amazing is that the accountability of being one on a part where you are completely responsible for your part, no one else has that part, and yet it's so exposed, and if you do anything wrong, people can tell, right? And I think, like, in a way, chamber music is a kind of microcosm for our society, and that we all have a really unique role to play. It's really important that we play that role as well as we can, but it's also not on us to do every single thing. We just do our part as well as possible. And so I think being able to feel that sense of kind of feeling a little bit exposed, but also feeling very accountable is something that we can all learn from chamber music.
That was very deep. I love that. Okay, so also kind of maybe in my observation, everybody there's different personality types in the choral world, the band world, the orchestra world. Okay, so I have a list here of 5 or 6 kind of, I'm going to call them harmless toxic behaviors. I'll say to you, and you tell who is more likely to do this: a choral person, a band person, or orchestra person. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Okay, number
Got it.
1, completely running out of gas on the way to the concert. Not I'm low on
my
gas, just no gas. My car broke down. Come get me.
I don't know. I would say like low brass.
Ooh, tough. Okay. What about tough? What about clapping when the plane lands?
Oh,
Who's
choir.
clapping? Choir, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Talking on speakerphone loudly in a public setting.
Oh my God. It's still choir to me.
Tough. Tough for choir. Good thing it's not a choir podcast. Okay.
Exactly.
Responding to a long emotional text with just the letter K.
Double reed player.
Nice. Okay. Setting 10 alarms and just sleeping through every single one.
Oh gosh. That's a good question. I mean, I'm like composer.
Because the deadlines, right? Deadlines.
Yes, totally.
Wow.
I mean, I'm like guilty as charged.
No one is safe right now from Reena's roasting. Okay. 2 more. Being 5 minutes away, but you haven't left the house yet.
Oh, maybe like middle string players, like violin two viola.
Innocuous. Okay, last one. Replying back LOL to a devastating text or devastating news.
Ooh, maybe flute player.
Ooh, that's a good one. My spouse plays flute.
Yes.
All right, that was good. I'm glad we did that. All right,
That's
so
so funny.
last question as we kind of wrap it up is you've only been writing for band for a relatively short amount of time. You have four pieces. What do you see as like some future areas of collaboration you want to explore, or some future types of blending of these elements or different compositional settings that you think could work well for band? Or like, what do you feel like the future holds for you when it comes to writing for band in particular?
Oh, wow. I mean, so much. I feel like I'm still learning a lot about everything in the band world because I know that, like, on one hand, you have a lot of kind of a huge educational group of people who are in schools and universities. And then there's kind of like almost this competitive edge to certain things because there's a lot of I don't even you ask me again and I'll know the names of all these things, but I know that there's a lot of competition that happens. And then I also know that there's amazing military bands and there's all of that which we don't necessarily have in the same way in the orchestra or choral world. And so all of that seems like stuff I want to just explore and get to know a little bit more about. But I can also see there being so many other ways to collaborate across, Hindustani and Western music. There's certainly so many other Hindustani instruments that could go with band. And I mean, there's also a lot of people have even asked me for choir and band music as well, because certainly writing well for orchestra, choir, chamber music, band, they require very different things, both in terms of understanding how to compose for those instruments, but then also, as we were kind of joking about, understanding what the culture is of each of those ensembles, right? So the culture of a choir and a band, where do those things combine, and where does that kind of combine with my own voice bringing in Indian elements, right? Because also it's like, think about a soloist in a choir singing something that sounds Hindustani, and then maybe a flute player in a band playing something that sounds Hindustani. How do those things kind of combine with one another? So I think I'm still asking those foundational questions, but I'm also asking questions of what does this allow us to do in the ecosystem, right? Because for me, and I was kind of alluding to this before, when I was young, there's a reason why there's not many people who are South Asian who are, professional full-time composers. And it's not because most of us didn't have access. I certainly had many friends who went to really good schools and went to universities. And now they're like out earning me by orders of magnitude. They're CEOs of companies, they're in medicine, they're in tech, they're doing AI. So it's like, it's certainly not for lack of access. It's because since at least my parents were immigrants, and there's certainly still a lot of people who are have that kind of immigrant mentality of like, if you're not really well established in this country, you need to do everything you can to make sure that you kind of take something that's a little bit safer as a profession. And that's fine, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think as Indian Americans are having a longer and longer history in this country, we're starting to get a little bit more comfortable with the idea of going into the arts. And so you're starting to see many more young people going into, staying in band at least for longer, whether it's all the way up through university. And some of them even play, not even professionally, but avocationally in bands when they do other things. I will say that the very first time, and so I've been composing professionally for over 25 years, and the very first time I've had any relative of mine actually just play a piece in the wild was a band piece. And so that was like really awesome. And I was like, okay, we're starting to actually make those connections that all those years ago I was wishing that I could be connected back into the culture of my family. I'm finally there. And so I'm excited to see what I can do, on the page, but I'm also really excited to see what kind of community that can build.
Yeah, I think it sounds like we're just scratching the surface of kind of the potential of your writing, of kind of this blending in general, just the whole ecosystem. So I
Yeah.
thank you greatly for coming on. Thank you for writing good music. Thank you
Oh, thank
for
you.
letting me work with you. It's been awesome. And
It's been so cool. Yeah, and I thank you for like helping me figure out stuff in the band world. I know that you're just someone who I'll just text you and be like, "I don't know what this is. Please help me." And you're always so great about that. And I think that is everything, because then I know I can actually focus on my own writing, and that I know I have someone who will be very honest and help me actually get the answers I need really quickly. So I appreciate that.
we love a good endorsement on the show. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's the middle of the afternoon there, so I'll let you get back to your busy day, your busy composing, and I look forward to putting this out and getting those pieces out there.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right.